What do board game nights, teachers, and the Australian cricket team have in common? They all have to deal with cheaters. Let's cut to the intro. Now, if you've had to deal with Australian television over the last several weeks, you would have seen consistently the Australian cricket team in the headlines for ball tampering, of all things, a level of cheating that they thought they could go out and put sandpaper onto one of the balls in front of some of the most advanced camera technology and expect to get away with it. It was kind of like watching school kids getting busted. They shoved the sandpaper into their pants, they looked sheepishly up at the umpire when they called them over, they pretended like they didn't know what was going on and then finally fessed up to it. It was a schmozzle, and we've heard about it constantly over and over again, but it does raise an interesting point. How do these professionals, how do these experts in their fields, these people at the top of their game, earning the big bucks, how do these people do something so stupid? This isn't clever cheating. This is the most ridiculous, obvious, dumbfoundingly stupid cheating that I've seen. And I could go on, but the reality is it's cricket, and I don't really care. But I am interested in the whole idea of what motivates a person to cheat, because in board games, believe it or not, there are people who are cheating at your table. In fact, I'm left wondering, would I cheat? Yes, I do believe, possibly. I mean, really, when it comes down to it, I mean, there are times we forgive ourselves. There are times that we cut ourselves some slack. Oh, I didn't play that right. Well, I'm not going to take it back, or I'm not going to say anything. Or, well, they didn't notice, so I'm not going to say anything. Or I can see something obvious on the board that I should change because I know it's wrong or I've done it wrong, but I'm not going to mention it, and we'll just go by, and it doesn't matter if the fact that I gain some strategic advantage out of it. It's probably minimal. It doesn't really matter. Yeah, we all have the excuses, and maybe we've done it. Maybe we're more willing to admit to it than others. What I'm interested in is what motivates genuine cheating. Recently, I played T.I.M.E Stories with some friends. In fact, we did a couple of chapters of T.I.M E Stories, and both times that we played, or both nights that we played the game on, we would go through the entire chapter, which meant that we'd reset the game 2, 3, sometimes 4 times, which if you play T.I.M E Stories, you know 4 times is kind of not that good. But we would reset the board and just keep playing, and we didn't fuss over too much. We weren't too strict on the rules. In fact, when it talked about, not taking things back, we took things back. We would change things. We would sneak peeks at cards. We would try and be really strict, but as the night wore on and our patience with resetting the board or resetting the game and doing it again wore thin, we fudged it a little, shall we say. Did we adhere to the rules strictly? No. Did we contravene the rules to our own advantage? Well, yes. Were we cheats? I mean, I'm wondering about this because it's a co-op game. We broke the rules. We all did it together. Is it cheating? I'm going to leave that for you to decide. But before I do, let's explore the concept of cheating a little bit. I guess cheating is something I'm interested in because mostly I play a lot of board games with young people, and when I was running a board game group at my last junior school, there was always 1 or 2 kids who were just very obvious cheats. One kid sticks out in my brain very clearly for a number of reasons. Not only was he very clearly a cheat, he was terrible at it, terrible at covering it up, and it just seemed compulsive. Even when he didn't need to cheat, he would still cheat. If he was winning, he would then still cheat. If it was a casual game where there was no points being played and we're doing it more as a social activity such as the game concept, he would still cheat. Why? Why was he so insistent on cheating? Why couldn't he stop that compulsion to break the rules or to try and get some extra advantage? Let's go to a few different places and see if we can gain some knowledge on this. And before I go deeper into this, we should start out by defining what cheating is. I'm just going to simply go with the definition that cheating is increasing utility while minimizing effort. And what I mean by that is utility is essentially anything beneficial or useful that we get out of whatever it is we're talking about. In this case, board games. Anything useful out of board games, we're trying to maximize that while minimizing the effort I put into gaining that. Normally we talk about equivalent return, so we talk about putting in effort to reap reward. Well, we're not doing that with cheating. With cheating, we're trying to get around the idea of putting in effort to get the reward. We want the good stuff with none of the hard stuff. That's cheating. That's just the definition I'm going to stick with for now. I'm sure there's probably some more discussion that could happen on that, but I think it's pretty useful for what we're discussing. Now, Stephen Levitt and Stephen Dubner wrote a book called Freakonomics, which they've also converted into a podcast. And one's a reporter and one's an economist. And they look at things, they look at situations from an economic perspective. They see cheating as a part of incentives. They give a really great example with incentives. They talk about incentives as things that regulate our behavior. Three things that they talk about that essentially regulate our behavior are economic, social, and moral incentives. And one example they give is a really great example for illustrating not only how incentives work, but how those three areas impact each other, how they can all be part of the incentives plan, and sometimes how there can be unintended consequences from providing certain incentives. Their example is outside hours school care. The problem was that parents would not pick up their kids on time. They had a handful of parents. Each center would have a good handful of parents who would just show up late. Now this costs the center money, it costs the center effort, it's just a pain in the bum really. And so they jumped in and were offering to help out these centers by doing some research and seeing if they could try a few things to fix their problem. What they did is they thought, well, they'll try and work on the economic incentive. They'll create They'll provide a punishment, essentially, or a fine for parents who show up late. And initially, they started with a small monetary fine of a number of dollars for parents who showed up after the closing time of the center. Now, what happened is once this fine was set in place, they had more parents leaving their kids after closing time. That's right, the number rose, and there's a number of reasons for that. Firstly, what they realized is initially when parents were leaving their kids late and coming to pick them up late, they were feeling the thrust of a social and moral incentive. From a moral perspective, they felt bad because they were hindering other people. They felt bad about the workers there. From a social perspective, there was a bit of shame involved because they knew that they'd gone past the time that they were supposed to, and the center would talk to them about that, and that would create some embarrassment. But they took that away and they put it onto the economic, and parents, as far as they were concerned, were more than happy to pay the small amount of extra or the fine to leave their kids there longer. And once it was an economic issue, they lost any sense of moral or social incentive. There was nothing intrinsically motivating them to go and pick up their kids earlier. If they were going to be late, well, they were more than happy to be late, stay back a little bit extra at work, stay at the gym for a little bit longer because they knew that they could pay the fine, and they were more than happy to pay the fine. Having seen the result, they increased the fine and found that still more parents were willing to leave their kids even later because the fine was always going to be better than hiring a babysitter or dealing with the inconvenience of finding a babysitter. Realizing their mistake, they decided to take away the fine altogether to get rid of that economic incentive. But unfortunately, they'd already lost the moral and the social incentive, and so what they had was no incentive there for parents to come and pick up their kids earlier. So they not only didn't have a fine, but now they didn't feel guilty about it or shamed about it. And so even more parents were happy to leave their kids after the closing time. So from an economic perspective, there were those three areas that were impacting decision making. Of course, what we really want is more intrinsic motivation than extrinsic motivation, even though we know that one can lead to the other and vice versa. To illustrate the incentives and how they lead people to cheat, Levitt and Dubner look at the example of school teachers in the United States. One of the issues for school teachers living in the United States is that a lot of the time student results and outcomes are connected to direct economic advantage for funding for schools, funding for their classroom, as well as job performance reviews. So even personal raises will come on the basis of student results, or even job loss will come on the basis of student results. And I am putting those two things together. We should remember that getting something is as much of an incentive as having something taken away. And so for these teachers, there's a huge economic benefit to having kids get good results. The downside is that some of these schools, especially schools with low socioeconomic demographics, they're dealing with problems of trying to get kids to school, let alone getting kids to stay long enough to study or being able to get to a level where they can produce good results. And so the odds are really stacked against them, and yet at the same time, on this blanket approach, they're looking at job loss, they're looking at losing funding for the school. That's a big issue, and of course, not to mention the fact that these results are often published, and so there is the social shaming. It's no wonder that the moral incentive suddenly gets lost, and teachers themselves have been found to cheat for students. On the standardized tests that are used to determine these factors, they've found through algorithms and looking at the data of the overall student results in individual classrooms compared to nationwide standings, they were able to find patterns of answers that indicated that teachers had been going back through the papers and editing the results of the students. So what they found is that because these teachers had such a need to fulfill that social and economic incentive, to meet those incentives, to keep their jobs, to get funding, to not be shamed publicly for the results, they were willing to shut off that moral sense of self and to cheat. Teachers cheating for students. That's a big deal. And ultimately what Levitt and Dubner come to the conclusion of is that in many respects, we all can come to a point where we are willing to cheat or to break the rules. Now, added into this is the work of Lisa Shu, who studied academic cheats, people who would cheat on tests and exams for academic advantage. She discovered that when people cheated, it shaped their morality. Once they'd cheated on the first exam, they were quite happy to cheat on more exams after that. Cheating actually shaped the way we viewed our moral sense of being, altering, in a sense, from Levitt and Dubner's findings, that moral incentive. When it comes to board games, why would people cheat at a board gaming night? I mean, there's clearly no economic value here. What we know from the work of Lisa Shu is that moral incentive can slowly be diminished or ignored, especially if we've cheated once before and gotten away with it. So that really leaves us with social incentive. And for people at a games night, the only real social incentive is to be able to say, yay, I won. Now, it doesn't seem like much, but I don't think people are genuinely cheating in big ways. I think it's the small things that matter, and I think the work of Dan Ariely helps us understand this. Dan Ariely is a psychologist who conducted 2 experiments and sort of helped explain some of the issues going on. In his first experiment, the Matrix experiment, he provided a series of math problems to people to solve. Now, these are simple enough math problems that if provided enough time, students can go through and solve them. But they didn't provide people with enough time. So at the end of the time period that they were provided to fill out their questions, they were asked to count up all the questions they got right. So they knew exactly how many they got right, how many they got wrong. Then they were asked to come down, shred their paper, and then just tell the person at the desk how many they had gotten correct. And they would receive $1 for every answer they got correct. Of course, what they did was they cheated a bit themselves. When people put their papers in to be shredded, it only shredded the edges and gave the illusion that their paper had been shredded. What they did afterwards is they tallied up how many each person said, went through and found their paper and compared the result. What they found is that when people had no consequence and felt that they had no chance of being caught, everyday average people who would see themselves as moral people were cheating. The majority of the people got 4 questions correct. The majority of those people said they got 6 questions correct, stealing an extra $2 from the psychologists. There were some who did, in fact, go big and say they got all 10 correct, but that was rare. When they tallied it up, they discovered that the people who cheated big cost them about $400 throughout the course of the experiment. But the people who cheated small, just the 1 or 2 extra question lie, cost them about $50,000 extra dollars. Dan's conclusion to all of this is that while in society there are big cheats like the Australian cricket team, they're not costing us the same as the everyday small cheat. The ATO suspects that we are losing millions of dollars to smaller cheats, and the bigger ones get publicized, they get the big deal made about them, but it's actually the small everyday stuff. And I don't half wonder if that's really the crux of where cheating is happening in the board game community. It's the small little things that we think we can get away with. The next experiment that Dan Early did was to do exactly the same thing, except this time, 30 seconds into the exam, they had someone, an actor, stand up and announce that they were finished, declare that they had completed them all, and walk out with the money. They found that if the person looked like they were from the same university as the students were more likely, they had an increase in cheating. People looking at someone in their own university getting extra money, clearly cheated, could not have completed all those questions in 30 seconds, but leaving the room, walking away with the lot. And their ability to identify with that person, that someone from their social group doing that, led to more instances of cheating. The way they know it was from the social group was because on other occasions they would bring in someone and dress them up like a person from one of the rivaling universities. And when that person did it, people felt morally angered by this situation, and so there was a decrease in cheating. And what they found is that people didn't want to identify or associate with someone who was from a rival university. They didn't want to think of themselves as being like that person, so they didn't conduct themselves using that same behavior. Ultimately, where Dan goes with this is that when cheating is made acceptable within the society, when people around you are more willing to cheat, we ourselves are more willing to cheat. And it kind of got me thinking about my friend there in the junior school. Why did he cheat so often? Why was it acceptable? I wonder if part of it was just his inability to fit in. He desperately craved attention from others and wanted people to praise him and provide adulation, but he just couldn't get it any other way. He struggled in class with his relationship, and often he was the one who got noticed by the teacher for talking, misbehaving. He didn't have an understanding of how to succeed well in a lot of school and academics, and he didn't know how to get positive attention from his fellow students. And so in this one moment in our gaming circle, when this young boy came in and he experienced what it was to win a game and have everyone go, well done, I think that was his draw card. That was his economic incentive to do it. He was definitely getting a social boost, and he was getting something out of it. He was finally getting recognized. Was he a big play cheat? No, it was all the small things that made the difference for him. It was all the small little cheating that got him through and got him on his way. And in many respects, maybe it was a failure on us to call him out on it more. I mean, we would point it out to him and just tell him to take it back and pretend like he forgot or made a mistake, but maybe we should have done a little bit more and tried to create some of that pressure, and yet at the same time let him know that it was safe to be himself and he was accepted the way he was. It's hard to say why people cheat directly, and honestly, I don't think even most people think about it. And in the social settings, sometimes it doesn't even matter. The times that I have made a mistake and pointed out, most people just go, oh well, let's just keep playing. With us in Time Stories, then I'm also left wondering, well, did we really cheat? There was no economic advantage. There's no social advantage because we didn't go out and talk about how well we did on the game, and there was no ladder for us to be compared to other players who had played Time Stories. There was nothing socially we could get out of it, and the moral impact was low. We had zero interest in continually resetting the game up to get it perfect, and once we'd gone past the game's expectation of doing it only no more than 4 times, well, we couldn't care less whether we took extra time or took turns back or did anything or peeked at cards. So did we cheat? Well, the incentives weren't there. We certainly broke the rules. Did we harm anything in the process? I don't know, I'm going to leave that one with you. In the meantime, I hope this has provided some food for thought on the process of cheating and why people cheat and the incentives that are involved with it. Also this week, as usual, I recommend that you go and check out www.gamerpalooza.com.au. We've got a bunch of interesting articles going up there. Of course, I'm most excited, very, very excited about Fireball Island getting onto Kickstarter and doing incredibly well. Not only was it funded within the first 66 minutes, within I think a couple of hours reached over $1 million. So that was phenomenal, and it's still going, so I highly recommend checking that one out. If you like what we're doing here, please hit that like button. If you're new here, please hit that subscribe button. And of course, in the comments section today, I'd love to hear your thoughts on cheats, cheating, and whether we were cheating in Time Stories. What are your thoughts there? Until next time, my name's Dave Adams. You've been watching Nerds of Wisdom. I'll see you later.